Hello and welcome along to another episode of My Football Story from the Honest Football Podcast. This week we've got a slightly different take on the footballing world as we're joined by broadcaster and journalist Faye Carruthers. Now Faye is a very well-known Luton fan and obviously we have a talk about that early on in the episode. We talk about her love for the game, how she got into it to start with, as well as how she got into her career in journalism. We talk about her path through from university student with limited opportunities for females to work in sport at the time, to now being one of the most recognisable faces and voices in the English game as a regular successful reporter on Soccer Saturday as well as a host on Talksport. A brilliant guest and one we've wanted to have on the show for a very long time, so I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. We can't thank Faye enough for giving up her time to speak to us. If you do enjoy the episode, please do put a thumbs up on it and subscribe down below for regular interviews, podcasts and vlogs from the Honest Football Podcast. But this is Faye Carruthers' football story and we really hope you enjoy it. Okay, I'm delighted to be joined by Faye now, and we'll start as we always do by going back to your childhood, and unfortunately, based on the conversation we had a minute ago, testing your memory. So we want to ask about your first footballing memory, whether it be watching on TV, as a play-in, in the back garden, anything. What's the first thing you remember about the game?
Probably playing in the back garden with my dad and my sister.
Okay.
But also watching. You know, there wasn't that much football on TV when I was growing up. Don't want to give my age away too much, but it wasn't, especially on terrestrial television.
Yeah. But
one of the early memories I have, I used to watch a lot of Manchester United because I grew up in the 90s when, United were obviously under Sir Alex Ferguson doing amazing things. Everybody at school seemed to support Manchester United. So I thought, maybe I like them. But one of my best friends growing up was a big Luton fan, but she also loved Arsenal. Okay. And I was like, I can support Luton as well. But I wasn't, a mad hatter or anything when I was that young. I used to follow the crowds, and then I really liked Leeds. I can't believe I'm now saying that out loud. I liked Leeds because obviously they were then in what was the UEFA Cup.
Yes. So
I used to watch them, on a Tuesday night, I think it still used to be, because they were on ITV.
Yeah.
So, they're probably my earliest memories, because my dad wouldn't take me to Kenilworth Road. I wasn't allowed to go because he'd gone, years and years ago, and he was like, I don't want you there. Which is now really funny because now he comes with me all the time to games. So,
I can probably understand him.
Yeah.
What about your first memories playing? Did you ever play competitively as a youngster?
No, but I have got a first memory of playing, and it was one of my best friends, Gary. We grew up together in Luton, and he had a football party. I want to say it was for his 7th birthday party, but I can't remember. He was actually a mascot at Luton years ago, but he had a football party, 5-a-side. I don't know if you know Lee Manor, at Lee Manor Recreation Centre. Yeah. We used to do roller disco there on a Sunday. It was also there for like 5-a-side football. Yeah. And so he had a 5-a-side football party, and I was the only girl playing. And actually his mum still has a video, old school VHS kind of camcorder footage of me hacking all the boys to bits. Like no skills whatsoever, but just going in hard with every tackle.
That's absolutely brilliant. That's what I was hoping to hear. And what about in terms of, I know you mentioned early on you weren't allowed to go to Kenilworth Road, but do you remember the first time you were then able to go to a game, and was it at Kenilworth Road?
It was at Kenilworth Road, yeah. And now this is where my memory is dreadful, and please don't tell me off for this. I can't remember if my first game was Millwall or Manchester City, but what I do remember is that I had a flip-down Motorola phone, and I'd had this conversation with my dad. So by this time I was at Nottingham Trent University, so I was 18.
Yeah.
And we had a radio station which at the time was called Kick FM, and it used to go on air twice a year. Okay. And the guys on my course knew I was a Luton fan and wanted to get me involved in the sports show. I wanted to go and report on games. I think one of the first games, well, I do know exactly the first game that I went to. It was Mansfield against Hayes.
Yes.
In the FA Cup, very old school, and I was so disorganised. I've told this story before. I was so disorganised that I learned a very, very harsh lesson of how not to be a football journalist. I got lost on the one-way system and he was late for the game and all sorts. Dreadful, so unprofessional. But I had spoken to the Luton press office and said, you know, I work for my university radio station. I'd love to come and cover a Luton game, please. Yeah. And so there wasn't enough room in the press box for me. So they gave me a ticket in the main stand. So, you know, where the players, I don't know if you know what the press box is like there, but just above where the press box is, that's where like the youth players sit and the wives and families. And so I was there with my flip down Motorola with its antenna to pull up to do my match reports on the phone. Yeah. And so that was, and again, don't ask me the score. I mean, if you ask me the score of a game from last week, I'll have forgotten it. It's dreadful. But I still can't, and I keep meaning to look, actually, because I've been asked this question a couple of times, and it's like I really must look back, but I don't have those old diaries of what date it was or anything. But I do remember my ex-boyfriend at the time is also a massive Luton fan, and he'd gone to that game. Yeah. But I'd had this conversation with my dad saying, oh, by the way, I'm home this weekend, because I'm going to cover Luton. And he went, no, you're not. I said, yeah, I am. I'm going to cover Luton for my radio station. And he's like, I've told you, I don't want you going to Kenilworth Road. And I had this whole diva moment of going, Dad, it's my career. And so he was basically just checking up on me the whole time that I was there to check I was all right. And then at the end, I was walking down, you know, towards Sainsbury's when I left the ground at the end, and I was buzzing. I think we'd lost. And this is another thing. I think it was the old Division 3. So, I mean, you think like Manchester City in the old Division 3, it's like crazy when you think about it now. And somebody jumped on my back and I freaked out because like the Man City fans were pretty scary. And again, the Millwall fans are pretty scary. And I still can't remember which one it was. But somebody jumped on my back and I was absolutely terrified. It was my ex-boyfriend who just seen me going. But so then, you know, I knew I was just overreacting because my dad had made me nervous. And then that was it. I was absolutely sold.
That's brilliant. I mean, I'm really glad you mentioned that Mansfield game, because that is the first thing that popped up into my research of you, was you talking about probably the most disastrous first day in working in media as such that you could have. And I guess it probably taught you a lot moving forward, which is probably a good thing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, but it definitely is. I'm probably a bit too over-organised now, if anything. I get to the game 3 hours before kickoff, and you know, it definitely helped.
And I guess I want to touch with you on your love for Luton Town. Obviously, I'm a Luton fan. You're a guest I've wanted to have on for a long time, and probably like me, you've seen a lot of probably a club that's had more ups and downs than most in the last 20, 30 years. Let's put it that way. So talk to me about your love for Luton Town and how on earth you put up with, as a football fan, such a massive roller coaster.
Well, to be honest, I don't think you're a real football fan if you don't have a roller coaster of emotion with your team in one way or another. And certainly you'll know, as a Hatters fan, we've had more of a roller coaster than maybe it's more of a nemesis perhaps than the teapots, but that is what makes me love the club even more, and even more under the current owners. You know, we're recording this at the time where we're looking at what's going on at Wigan, and you know, we had something very similar when John Gurney took over. And I think, if I'm completely honest, that is probably where my absolute, oh my God, I love this club, I do not want anything to happen to this club, when he took over. And that jeopardy of we could lose this, we could not be coming here anymore. What's he doing? Because we'd had that amazing promotion season with Joe and Nick, and everything was just brilliant, and then all of a sudden it's like he sacked them. Now the worst thing about this is that I was in Australia when that all happened, and the pop idol manager, I was travelling and having to hear what was going on at my club from thousands of miles away was so hard. So I couldn't go on any of the protest marches or anything like that. But I was like, you know, getting everybody I knew in this hostel that I was staying in Sydney at the time. I was getting everybody to sign this petition. And I think that's probably where I knew that it was more, you know, I've always love my club, support my club, but that was when I knew it was like, no, this means so much to me. and so much to everybody in this town. It's a huge thing. So I think that's probably where the real "don't you dare take this away from me" moment came. And then the second time that happened, or the second time I felt that same feeling, was in the Johnson's Paint Trophy final. And I'd taken my whole family, and so we were there en masse. And right at the beginning, they had these great big helium balloons with the crests of both clubs on, rotating. And I just stood there and from nowhere just started crying, because I just thought our club might not exist after this. You know, that feeling of, you know what it's like now we know, obviously, you know, we came out, FC 2020 took over, and the rest is history, if you like. But at that moment, we didn't know that it was going to be okay. Yeah. We were just going into oblivion, which effectively was the Football League, out of the Football League, which now it isn't. You know, the National League now is so competitive because you have lots of big teams that have fallen on hard times down there. But at the time, it felt as if we might not come back from it, because we'd seen other clubs not come back from it.
It was probably one of the best, but one of the strangest days I've had as a football fan, thinking, is my club going to be here next year? Are any of these people going to be here? But we're also got 40,000 fans around us winning a trophy at Wembley. It was a very strange day to take in.
It was. But, you know, that's what makes us Luton. Yeah. You know, that's what makes it special, is that everybody's been on this journey. Oh, God, I hate that word. Sorry. I was about to swear then as well. I can't stand that word. We've all been on a journey. But, you know, it does feel like that. And actually, there are a lot of neutral football fans and fans of other clubs. Obviously, there are plenty who really hate Luton.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, most of them speak quite fondly about Luton and the injustice that we suffered. And so they do want us to do well. And that's really nice. And what's also hilarious within the media, we might end up coming on to this, so I'm sorry for like jumping ahead, because the broadcaster in me just like takes over, sorry. But there are Luton fans everywhere. Like, it's in the woodwork, like, and particularly throughout the media, there are loads of Luton fans all come out the woodwork. I was working with a guy from UEFA the other day, and my other producer just said, "Oh, did you know that Al's a Luton fan?" I said, "I had absolutely no idea." He said, "He's only just found out you are as well." So, you know,
that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the administration and the period under John Gurney as well, because it was probably the most eye-opening moment for me doing this podcast. Is we spoke to Tony Thorpe, and he was talking about that transfer that summer, and talking about being in a room with the chairman and with Mick Harford saying, "Why are you selling him for 50 grand? He's worth loads more." But of course, an administrator's only there to pay the bills. And it's the weirdest position for a footballer to be in. And obviously, unfortunately, Tony took the flak for that for nearly 20 years. But it's really bizarre to see just how close to going out of business it is, and how cutthroat it has to be at that point.
Yeah, I think I still remember the administrator's name. I'm not going to say it out loud, but I think I still remember it, because I remember cursing him quite a lot. But, you know, again, we're seeing it. And unfortunately, we're going to see it a lot, I feel, over the next few years. And that's why I'm so proud of our owners now, and how they are much more, having seen what we've gone through in the past, they know how crucial this football club is, and they know how making it sustainable is the most important thing. And, you know, you see a lot of these owners come in and they've got, you know, pound signs in their eyes and getting to the big time and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, but if that doesn't happen, how are you going to deal with it? You know, and I know we're obviously struggling on the brink of being out of the Championship, but actually the business that we did, bearing in mind what we have, I thought pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a position where we will always be a selling club, but the fact that two players can essentially pay for half of a stadium development, it shows how far we've come in 5 or 6 years, really. So I would never argue with that business.
And we've got exciting things to come, and that's the thing. I'll be gutted that we're not in the Championship, because actually I genuinely think that's where we belong. Yeah. But at the same time, if we have to rebuild again and do it slowly, then so be it.
And I wanted to ask very quickly, and I know we're jumping ahead on the media side now. Do you see those experiences with the Luton as helpful to your career? Because obviously you mentioned Wigan now, and you mentioned that probably quite a few more clubs in the Football League that will happen to over the next few months and couple of years. You probably couldn't have much more experience without being in that situation than seeing it happen at Luton 4 times in 10 years.
Yeah, I suppose so. I'd rather not have that experience. And actually, when I sit there and I think, look, I don't want to single out any clubs because it's unfair to the supporters, but there are other things going on in the Championship this season that are not getting highlighted enough. And when you think of, oh, here's 30 points. What? And then there's people getting away with quite a lot of, let's not make your podcast get you in any trouble.
No.
But when there's things that are going on that are not, there's something not quite right there, and they're not being penalised, that is a problem for me.
Yeah.
Because of what we've gone through.
Exactly.
And I think you're only gonna feel that quite as strongly as we do when you've been through it.
Yeah.
Like otherwise, it's just something that you see happens to other teams, and other clubs go through it. Yeah. When you felt it, I mean, I just feel so horrendous for those Wigan fans, because that's just come absolutely from nowhere. Here's the rug, whoosh, then it's gone.
I mean, it's crazy, really, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Anyway, that would be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we did do a brief one on Wigan last week, and the amount of fans that reacted with... Last night, we were in euphoria, beating Stoke 3-0 and had no idea it was coming. And how administration, you normally see a warning sign coming. You did at Luton, certainly. But that's the most out-of-the-blue one I've ever seen from the business side. And obviously, as the story develops, it seems to be getting worse and worse. But
oh God, well, I mean, I don't even know how they're gonna work that one out. How they're gonna prove anything? I mean, it's just crazy. And then when you've got the EFL coming out and saying, we reject Wigan's claims that it's come from COVID, which is, fair enough, and that the 12-point deduction stands. But then you're thinking, well, but you let these people take over.
Yeah.
And there just never seems to be enough acceptance of blame for that. And I still do believe, I know it's called something else now, I can never remember, but to be honest, it's just semantics anyway. Fit and proper persons test, whatever the hell that means. Look at Charlton.
Yeah.
There's so many. I mean, there's so many clubs you can't even list them anymore. It's so long.
Yeah.
Something has to be done at a higher level to stop this happening, because clubs are people's community, and we've seen that even more prevalently. I live in Wimbledon.
Yeah.
And what AFC Wimbledon obviously went,
great example of it, isn't it?
My husband was a Wimbledon fan. And actually, I've now converted him to being a Hatter. He'll keep an eye on the Dons, but they're not, as far as he's concerned, it's not Wimbledon, the club he supported as a kid. But we always look out. They're a lovely club, and they do so much in the community. Yeah. And when we had that playoff final at the Etihad, of all clubs to have beaten us in the final, I didn't mind it being them. No. Because of what they'd gone through. And I think and you're going to get this a lot. A lot more football fans will have an affinity with other fans going through this kind of pain.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I guess we will see probably next season just how much you've converted him to a Hatter if they play against Wimbledon next season. We'll wait and see on that.
We've missed the last season. We missed the Wimbledon games.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. We were away, and obviously it's fine. Tuesday nights most of the time I can do, but if it's a Saturday, I've got absolutely no chance.
Yeah, that's it.
So yeah, we don't do so well with that.
We'll come back to your career in a minute. The last question I want to ask you in terms of the media and football now is, obviously you talk about, you're a football fan like anyone else. You have frustrations. You have frustrations when you see something not happening right in the Football League or with a certain club. When you're broadcasting and your job is to be factual and to allow anyone to tell their side of the story, how difficult do you find it to bite your tongue sometimes?
Not very, because I'm used to it. Okay. So it probably, I think people think it's harder than it is. My mum has said this to me before, so I liken it to whenever I go on stage, for example, if I'm hosting an event, I'll be really nervous beforehand. And my mum's been with me, or my husband's been with me, or my dad's been with me, and they've gone, but you'll smash it. It's fine. And I'm like, oh, I just feel a bit sick.
Yeah.
And then I go on stage and I just morph into this completely different person. and that's what I do when I'm at football. I'm a journalist first and foremost. You know, I always find it difficult. I'm friends with Nathan.
Yeah.
And I find it very difficult. I don't want to ask him difficult questions. So when he came back, I'd had a chat with him beforehand and just said, look, let's work out what you're happy with, what you're not. You know, he's such an open book. He's pretty much happy with everything. But I find it, you know, it's hard for me to like push him on things that I know the fans want to hear. But the best way to answer that question is by telling you, I'm the voice of the fans. They want it. I'm asking the questions they want to ask.
That's it.
So whilst you have to keep your professional hat on, but if I didn't ask questions that they want to hear the answers to, I wouldn't be doing my job properly.
Absolutely. That's a perfect way to say it, I guess. And let's move back towards your career. Obviously, we got to the stage of covering your first match at university. And that's what I wanted to ask you about is how early on did you know that sports journalism or the football side of journalism is what you wanted to be in? Were there any other career aspirations or aspirations in football aside from that?
No other aspirations in football because I can't play. So I'm a netballer, and there weren't really many opportunities for me to play as a kid. As I say, I'm not touching on my age, but it just wasn't widely available like it is now. So I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I think you might have seen an article that I wrote for
Yes.
Women in Football. It was either that or an interior designer, because I had all the books. And I still love interior design now. I have a real passion for it. I love it, but I can't draw, or I can, but just not to the, you know, I'm not that artistic really. Yeah. And I realized quite quickly, particularly technical drawing and stuff that you had to do, that it wasn't for me. Whereas writing was something that I absolutely loved and I found easy. Yeah. And so when I actually wanted to be, I had a photo on my fridge that my mum printed out for me of me. I aged, possibly, we think I was either 5 or 7, not entirely sure. But I've made my own television out of a cardboard box, cut out the middle, and I'm reading the news. I wanted to be Moira Stewart reading the news. Then as I got older, I fell in love with football. I found a load of old stuff going through when I was clearing out about a year ago, all my old fantasy football bits of paper. Yeah. And I had written out every player in the neatest handwriting with exactly their cost. I'd worked out all the costings because you used to do it through the papers. I used to do it through the Daily Mail's Fantasy Football Sports Mail, whatever it was called. And I just loved everything about it. And I would watch as much as I possibly could. So I knew I loved sport. I've grown up in my house. Sport is on all the time in my house. Yeah. My dad's a golfer. We all love rugby, football, tennis. Every sport there is, we'll sit and watch it as a family. Yeah. But I didn't think that was accessible to me, if I'm honest. There were very few female sportscasters. So Helen Rollison springs to mind. Hazel Irvine, I'm not sure whether she'd quite broken through then, but it just wasn't, you know, it was a man's game, if you like. And so I didn't really think that I would be able to do that. And again, I always want to make sure that I'm not playing the woman card, because I don't like that. I'm part of Women in Football, and it's a very important organisation to me, because I want young girls coming through to know that they can do this, because I didn't have that. And actually I've suffered a lot from confidence issues because of that. Now I'm older and I just don't care. So it's fine. But, you know, I'd love to go back 10, 15 years and, you know, say to me, you don't have to prove yourself twice as much as other people do. And I'd have probably put myself forward for doing more football stuff earlier. Yeah. When I left university, I decided I didn't want to do journalism at all, because I'd been exposed to news journalism and quite hard news journalism. And I just thought, I don't think I'm strong enough for this. Yeah. So I ended up being a PA in marketing, but at Sky, because then I was kind of like, well, I'm kind of in the right area. I changed my mind. Yeah. And I did change my mind. I missed it, and I missed the sport, and I was just desperate to be back involved and doing something within sport. So I'd gone and found the woman that booked runners and loggers for Sky Sports, and introduced myself to her, and she gave me extra shifts. So I used to do my 9 to 5 job in the marketing department, dreadful PA, and then in the evenings I used to go and work, and weekends I used to go and work for Sky Sports, so logging golf, tennis, football for goals on Sunday. I once did NFL as well, having not do you remember Kevin Cadle, who used to host the NFL? He's no longer with us, unfortunately. What a lovely man he was. And when I first was asked to do NFL, I'd said, I've been to one NFL match because my parents had taken us to see the London Monarchs against the Birmingham Firefly at Wembley. So I was like, I've been to, I know American football. But I didn't know half the rules, and I had to log this game, and I had no idea what was going on. And so Kevin Cadle had given me like a rundown of the basic rules, because the games lasted so long, and obviously I was then working 9 to 5. What I didn't realise is I was doing 2 games back to back, so I was there till like 3 a.m. or something utterly ridiculous, and then had to get up at 7 to go to work at 9 the next day. But yeah, that's kind of when I knew, when I was not working in sport at all, and I missed it. I really missed it. And then those runner jobs led to me going to Sky Sports News, and I've still done a bit of news in between. I have to pay the bills, and I do love news. And I think actually, having worked on news, it makes me a better sports journalist, because I can spot a story, and I don't just do games. I don't just cover games and analyse games. I can do sports news as well, and journalism. I'm a member of the SJA, and that is a very important organisation for keeping up standards in the future in the industry.
And one of the things I wanted to touch on, I don't want to drag on for it too long, because I know it's something people get bored of talking about, and every time there's an issue, they ask, can we have a female representative to talk about this? And I don't want to bore you with it, but we have to talk about opportunities, because it's something that female pros we've had on have mentioned in terms of playing, but also from the journalism side. You mentioned there about feeling like you had to prove yourself more to get the same role. How did you feel about that at the time, and how much more importantly do you think it's changed now? Do you think it is on the right track still?
Yeah, it's I mean, I'd love to be a girl coming out of university now and going into the industry, because it's exciting. I'm excited for them. I regularly get girls getting in touch with me, and guys as well. And that's what I want to make sure people know, is that just because I'm a female working in the industry, it doesn't mean you can't come and get advice from me as a guy wanting to come into the industry. Absolutely. This industry should be open for everybody who's passionate about sport. And I'm just proud that there are so many more opportunities for everyone, that it's a much more even playing field now. People will feel as if, particularly at the moment, there are people given more of an opportunity than others. But that's how it used to be the other way around. And so you just have to suck that up, because this industry does need to have more women in it, have more Black and ethnic minority presenters in it. There's so much more it needs to do. And there are lots of people fighting a very good fight. And it feels a lot more now like they're not having to fight as much. It's more of a discussion, a debate, how can we move forward? What can we do better? At Talksport, for example, they're doing fantastic stuff. You've now got Laura Woods presenting the breakfast show, and so many more fantastic people coming through the ranks. That's crucial to changing it so that we stop having this conversation. I don't want to be seen as a female sports broadcaster. I'm a sports broadcaster. I've been saying that for years. But still I get, and this has to change all the way down, because I still get young male and female journalists at university approaching me saying, can we talk about your experiences as a female in sport? I just want to get to the place where that doesn't happen, where that conversation doesn't need to happen anymore, and people are just taken on merit.
Agreed. I think that's the most important thing with any of these issues. The one time we know it's no longer an issue is when it doesn't get discussed. That's the easiest way to work out when it's finished, isn't it?
Absolutely, but it has to be discussed in order for it to change. So exactly. I don't dismiss those discussions in the slightest, because we've been having them for a long time, and soon enough will come out the other side where it becomes less of a discussion, but it was vital to have it in the first place in order to actually, because sometimes people just don't realise, they genuinely just don't realise from the other side what it's like to feel, you know. And equally, you know, I could put an argument back to my 25-year-old self that I didn't believe in myself enough. I used it as a barrier because I thought that people would have this perception of me because I was female, and actually maybe I was wrong. So there's lots of ways. I think you have to look at it from as many different directions and perspectives as possible to understand it as well as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to try and move back to something a bit lighter for you now, because I don't want to make it a negative interview. I want to move back to where you mentioned, probably the area you became a household name, which was the big break at Sky Sports News on Soccer Saturday, which obviously is a huge flagship show for football fans up and down the country. And obviously, as you mentioned, again, for women in sport, it became the point where you've actually almost become probably the leading football correspondents across the board, let alone male or female. So for yourself, I guess Bianca Westwood and Michelle Owen as well, probably the main three that stick in my mind. How did you find that, getting that opportunity? And how do you find getting paid to watch football every week?
Oh, well, getting paid to watch football every week is a dream. I mean, that's just amazing. I still pinch myself. I genuinely. I cannot describe how proud I was when I was approached by Soccer Saturday to be on. So I'm friends with Bianca and Michelle.
Yeah.
I mean, Bianca is just brilliant. Yeah. I remember when I first started working at Sky Sports News, I was working on the news desk. I was booking cameras on assignments, and Bianca was changing all the tapes for Soccer Saturday in the background. This was in the days where George Best was on the show.
All right,
and we were in a really old building with no light. And to see the progress that we've both made, but particularly Bianca, because she was the first female to do it. And she got a lot of stick, you know, which just always used to drive me absolutely nuts. But my granddad used to love watching, and I've told Bianca this, and Jeff used to love watching Jeff and Bianca go at it. And he always used to say, oh, you could do that. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And I Sky for a long time was always very much, I didn't feel like I fitted in terms of, I didn't feel glamorous enough for television. I'm not a glamorous, anybody who knows me, I'm very clumsy. And I don't wear makeup unless I'm on television, really. Sometimes if I know that there's going to be a camera around. That's what's been awesome about lockdown. It's been like zero makeup.
No one has to worry how they look for 3 minutes.
I know. But I just, again, it's that confidence thing it goes back to. And then Michelle went and did it, and she, you know, she's absolutely brilliant. To be then asked if I wanted to come on board, I was nervous as hell, because it's not like it's a small stage and no one's watching. And you know what the audience is like. You know, if you say anything wrong, again, it goes back to the male-female thing, but you can have a male reporter. You know, everybody laughed at Cammy when he missed a sending off. If one of us three had done that,
you're slated immediately.
Absolutely. It's difficult, really difficult. But the minute I did my first one, and actually I had a nightmare on my first one because the cameras, the feed didn't work at Gillingham. So I'd done a few ISDNs, but I'd done that at BBC for Final Score. But my first actual in vision, I mean, and this is the worst thing, and this is me. I was more concerned about what am I going to wear that actually looks okay and I'm still warm enough or cool enough or whatever. You know, it was boiling at Gillingham, and I was thinking I was too bloody hot. So I was more worried about, you know, how people would judge what I looked like than what I was saying, because I know what I love football. I can analyse a game. I'm not concerned about getting that wrong. I was concerned about what people would perceive me to look like, because people can be really cruel. Anyway, I got there, and the cameraman I was working with, Dan, was lovely. But the problem was we didn't have live feed. We had a problem. And so I had to do my first set of reports as live, which is really weird, because obviously you react off somebody and they react off you, and it's natural. Instead, when a goal came in, I basically had to wave at them and then do the hit. And I don't know if you've ever done anything pre-recorded. You second guess yourself, as opposed to when you're live, it's live. And if you stumble, you stumble. And so that was hard, but luckily, you know, it went without a hitch. So it was fine. And so then when I did my next game, that felt so easy in comparison, because I didn't have all the technical stuff to have to worry about. So yeah, I can't remember what the original question is. I've waffled on. I can't remember what it was. But yeah, I feel very privileged to be paid to watch football, and, you know, working on that show. You know, I've said this before. My granddad didn't get to see me, and I'm so gutted about that, because he'd have been so proud, because he used to message me. So he had a syndicate, and he'd message me every week, and he'd always pick the game that I was at. So it would be like, I still remember having a conversation with him walking through Bishop's Park after Fulham had got a late winner, and it had made him win like 120 quid on his bet. So he was chuffed to bits. Yeah. But yeah, it was a great, and it still is a massive privilege working on that show, because it's such good fun. It's really good.
And we always ask the professional footballers we had on what their main emotion was before they step on the pitch for the first time when they're in a squad. For you, that first time when you were at the game and you knew you were going to be on TV, what was the main emotion in your head? Was it fear, excitement, a bit of everything? What was there?
Well, luckily, because of all the technical issues we had, I didn't have time to think like that. Yeah. And I'm really glad about it, because I couldn't overthink it, because I was more concerned about whether or not we were actually going to make it to air. That probably took that away. But I still do get a massive amount of adrenaline every time, without fail, pretty much. If I don't have any adrenaline before I'm going on air, I worry. It's nervous energy. I'm a fidget as well. I'll tap my leg, or I'll, you know, usually pre-match, I'm singing along to the music, chatting away to my cameraman. I just try and be as relaxed as possible. And then depending on the game, there are some games where you feel you're absolutely over everything and in it. Yeah. And there are other games where you're like, this game is so, I have no idea what's going on. Or if you're doing West Brom in their bloody kit, like, it's a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. QPR at home, blue and white hoops with gold numbers, nightmare. So you're more heightened in terms of concentration times like that.
There are probably little things that we don't even think about as fans being problems, particularly for radio commentators and things like that as well. You don't think of it, do you?
Wind is a big problem. So Lincoln, I was at around about January time, and they've got a new gantry. Yeah. That's totally exposed. And even with my headphones on, my hair, that's what's going on there every time. And I'm like, trying to do this. And then my papers, this blows off here, this blows off here. It's like, oh my gosh.
You know that Jeff Stelling will be straight having a laugh about it, won't you? So you know you're not going to get away with it.
I know, absolutely. Well, he exposed me as a Luton fan once.
He did, yeah. He would, but he's a Hartlepool fan, so, you know, he's got no leg to stand on, has he?
I know.
I wanted to ask you about going from them early days where you're first excited to be on Soccer Saturday and being sort of one of the trailblazers as such, to now where you're one of the leading correspondents across the board. How does that journey, and I know I'm using that word now myself, how did that journey work for you, and how do you feel now going to the stage where you're one of the people that everyone looks to as an example for the industry and for the show?
I mean, before you said it, I hadn't thought about it, if I'm honest. I still don't really see myself like that at all. I still feel like I've got so much to learn and so much to do to be better. Like, every single time I'm on air, I want to be better the next time. Yeah. So I never feel like that. But I suppose I am aware when people come to me and ask me for advice, that they can see that I can do it, and so it's accessible to them, going back to the previous conversation. Also about where you're from as well. You know, I grew up in Luton, and to let other people know that, you know, what you can go on and do in wherever you're from. You know, it's nice to know that there are people from your town or your city or your village or whatever have gone on and done something, you know, that you might want to do.
Yes, and you certainly improved the reputation of Luton a little bit in that sense as well.
I'm not sure about that. Not sure about that at all. But yeah, it's a difficult one. It's well, you can probably see my cheeks are quite red anyway after I came in from the rain, but yeah, it just makes me go red and want to hide. So
I guess you must be able to see that your standard of work must be fairly respected, because you're now pretty much involved in every major sports organisation in the country and major media outlet. So you must know you're doing something right in that sense, because you're now, as you mentioned off air before, a regular presenter on Talksport as well. So how did that opportunity come about, and how do you find the differences from radio to TV, I guess, is the main area on that one?
Well, radio was always my first passion, and I've loved radio since I was a young kid. I used to host my own radio station in my bedroom with my dad being my guest. I used to interview him and he'd do lots of accents.
Yeah.
And I worked at Talksport. So I left Sky News. I worked on Sky News Radio, and I'd gone in and I'd helped out at Talksport because we did their bulletins, and they'd asked me to go in and work for them to cover someone on holiday. And I'd gone in and really liked it. And then they really liked me, and they said, we'd really like you to come and work for us permanently. So I was like, oh, but I've always worked at Sky. Like, I never wanted to leave Sky. That was like my dream place.
Yeah.
And so, but I took the plunge and I went and I worked on the Alan Brazil Sports Breakfast as the newsreader for 4 years, which was brilliant fun, really good. But multitude of different things went on, and I went freelance. And it was the best thing I could have done, actually. Very scary at the time, but I got so many other experiences that I wouldn't have got at Talksport. So I wanted to cover games, but that wasn't accessible to me at the time there. And it's very easy when you've been somewhere for quite a long time to get pigeonholed. So I left and worked all over, which was just brilliant. Was given opportunities to prove myself, which was great.
Yeah.
And then, so I've still got loads of mates that I worked with back then at Talksport who still work there now, who are now in management, who, I'm friends with a lot of the presenters. And Talksport as a station has changed massively from when I left. So I think I left in 2011. And I was approached last summer, so 2019, I was approached to go out and cover the Women's World Cup for Talksport. Yeah. And I thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity. I'd love to do that. So I did. And it was great. It was really good working back at Talksport again. I met the new boss, who is just fantastic and has made so many amazing changes to the station, and is a leader who you want to follow and want to see what they're going to do next. Yeah. And that is really important to me. And so I said yes. And obviously I'm freelance, so going and doing things at different places, I could still do all the stuff that, I love doing. And I didn't think anything else would come of it, and then after I did, they were really pleased with the job that I did out in France, which was hard work, by the way. I was out there by myself. I was like presenter, engineer, reporter, producer. It was, travel organizer. It was, oh my goodness me, exhausting, but brilliant. And then they decided that they wanted to do a women's football show. So they asked me to host this new women's football show and basically start it from scratch. So that's like my ideal. If somebody says to me, we want to do this, but it's a blank canvas, here you go.
Build it your way is always the best, isn't it?
Yeah, I get to use my producer skills, my presenter skills, everything. It was great. So that's what we did. We launched that, and I was going to games, still doing all Sky and stuff like that. And then earlier on this year, I was asked if I wanted to be the England correspondent for the Euros this year. Yeah. What would have been the Euro 2020. And I mean, that for me that's been my dream job as a kid. I'd say it's my dream job. I never thought I would be asked to do that ever. And I was mega excited. I, had a place that I was going to be staying in Burton after the Premier League season. I was then supposed to be obviously in March, we were due to do some England friendlies. Yeah. Oh my God. So obviously then COVID happens. And it's like, I can't believe I was that close. But they want to use me again next year, which is great. But in the meantime, my show was still running on Talksport 2, Women's Football Weekly, and they asked me if I wanted to come in and host a quiz for a couple of weeks during lockdown on Saturday nights. I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. So they paired me with Darren Bent, and I'd never met Darren before, and we just clicked straight away. Such just the loveliest guy, and we had such a laugh. And then they just kept, obviously because lockdown kept being extended and extended, we ended up doing 13 weeks, I think, in total. And it was just awesome. It was really good. And then I thought that was it. And then they approached me when we got all the fixtures and said, we'd really like you to host part of our game day coverage for the late shows. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, which is brilliant. So I host game day between 5 and 10 on Saturdays at the minute, which is amazing.
Fantastic. I guess I wanted to ask you, probably on the media side, to think about the negatives, particularly when reporting at games, which I guess now with Talksport is probably not quite as frequent, but when you're reporting for Soccer Saturday Night, I think the thing I remembered probably most about you in the last year is we'd gone to Blackburn away, which I think it was Blackburn where you were covering the Luton game. And then I think we got a train about 45 minutes after the game and you were in the carriage. And it just suddenly struck me, what are you doing here 45 minutes after the game? And you suddenly realise how quick the turnaround is and how quick you've got to be out of places and you're moving on to the next one. So is that probably, I guess I'm asking a bit more about the non-glamorous side that you don't get to see on the TV.
The non-glamorous side is me running with a coffee and all my bags to the train to try and make it pre-match, turning up at the ground, and because I don't want to put my makeup on until I'm there, otherwise I look like I'm going out for the night. So most of the time you'll find me pre-kickoff. So as I say, I like to get there a good 3 hours before. So a lot of the time I'll walk to the ground, depending where it is, unless it's raining or something, and don't want to ruin my hair. But I will then find a toilet, basically. Find a toilet in the ground. Depending on the ground, depends on the standard of the toilet that I can get dressed in. So then I'll get dressed. I'll put all my layers on if it's winter, and I'll do my makeup. So that's not very glamorous. Then trekking up with all my stuff with the cameraman up God knows how many stairs to get to the gantry. Nottingham Forest is a good one, actually. So Nottingham Forest, the gantry and the position that Soccer Saturday use is right at the end of the gantry. It's a really rickety staircase, and then it has like pipes going all the way. So you're literally going under, over, all the way to the end. And there are spiders and spider webs everywhere. And because I have my backpack on, the amount of times I've got stuck or I've ripped my coat on a bit of the thing, like no one sees any of that. And then you'll get up there to do like team news on a Tuesday night and they'll go, oh, we're dropping team news, we don't have time for it. But then you've got to stand up there in the cold because it takes too long to get back down to the press room to then come back up again before kickoff. So you're just stuck.
That's the bit we probably don't think about as fans, because we see, I mean, Luton's another good example of a very lacking in glamour gantry area. I know they've changed it this year. Is you don't think about that side of it.
From there.
No, because you were in the enclosure last time, weren't you?
Yeah, so the family stand at the back in the corner, and that has its own problems because people are watching the game, so they're standing up in front of you or they're shouting and you're trying to hear, you know, when they're going to throw to you, which is difficult. Quite often I love just standing chatting with the fans while the game's on. That's great. And like some gantries you can do that, others you're just completely on your own. QPR is the worst one for me in terms of getting to the loo. So no one thinks about this. You're trying to get to the loo and you've like maybe you've been up there since say 2:00, because I like to get up there for the warm-ups. So I do I go by boot colour and things like that. And so I have all my colour-coded books out and I'm working out bits and I'm writing stuff down as during the warm-up. Or if someone's got a crazy haircut or, you know, something like that, it's easy then to spot. So you've been up there since 2, and then you get to half time and you've had 2 cups of tea and you're desperate for the loo. But at QPR, the closest toilets, you've got to get through all the crowd to get downstairs, then be like, it's so tight. And then there's always a queue for the loo. And the most embarrassing thing is having to be that person where you go, excuse me, I'm working on television and I need to be back up. And can I jump to the front of the queue? And you're like, oh my God, I'm that person. How embarrassing. But you just know you have no other choice. Otherwise you're going to miss a goal at the start or something like that. That's the non-glamorous side.
I think there's a fair few in there, to be honest.
Yeah.
And QPR, I'd agree, even as a fan, is probably the worst place to try and get around in. So there's no argument with that from the other side either. I guess the final thing is, obviously, we always ask different people involved in the game, whether it be the media side, the professional side, about quick fire questions for the best things I've ever seen. So for you, you're going to have seen probably more games than most people we've had on, including pros. So I wanted to ask you about the best player you've ever seen in the flesh.
Best player I've ever seen in the flesh.
I appreciate it might take a while to answer that one.
Oh my God. Oh, let me think. I mean, I've seen some pretty amazing players. Probably watching Raheem Sterling, watching him close up, he's so quick. That's pretty impressive. But I don't know if that's a good enough answer.
Well, that's the thing. You've probably covered nearly every level of football in the English professional game, haven't you? So you've probably seen some of the best players at every level, and you've probably seen some horror shows from some of the best players as well.
Yep. I've seen some horrible games. I went through a real run of watching a load of goalless draws that were awful. But I've had some cracking games over the years as well. But I told you at the beginning, I have a memory like a sieve, so I can't even pick one out in particular.
This final section is probably going to be the hardest for you.
Oh, definitely. So yeah, Raheem Sterling, I'd say live.
And then I guess thinking more with a Luton or a fan hat on, the best player you've seen for Luton and your favourite manager for Luton.
Well, my favourite manager.
Not to be biased.
Yeah, my favourite manager. It will always be Mick Harford, but I love Nathan. So yeah, that probably those two. And bearing in mind they're now dream teaming it almost.
Yeah.
Again, that's pretty good. Best player. Ooh, that's a difficult one.
Can be your favourite, if not the best.
My favourite. I loved Jean-Louis Valois. Absolutely,
a lot of fans go for him. Yeah.
Yeah, just because with the hair and the movement, and it was it was just a bit Ginola-esque. But he wasn't, if that makes sense. And that it's only because of the hair and the and the French thing. But I loved watching him play. He was great. Can I change my mind on that? I'm so sorry.
Go on.
I'm gonna put Steve Howard up there.
Yeah, not a bad shout at all.
There we go.
That's fair enough. And then your final one, and again, it will probably morph into one answer, is we ask everyone for their favourite football game they've ever seen. But for you, I wanted to ask, as I have for a previous media person, their best moment working in media as well. So I don't know, depending on the game, if they'll overlap.
Oh, God.
Your favourite career moment?
The best game, and not necessarily game of football, but the most emotional game was when we won the Johnson's Paint Trophy. Yeah. Like, that was just great. Best game I worked at. I just can't think, genuinely. They all, this is going to sound, I know I'm so privileged in my position, but they genuinely sometimes all morph into one. It wouldn't even stand out necessarily to anybody else, probably. Yeah. That's why.
I feel horrible putting you on the spot like this.
No, it's not. It's something that I should probably know. I'm useless at things like this because I just don't really think about it. I
Just remember the answer because you'll probably get asked again.
I know. I have been asked before and I can't even remember what answer I gave. See, I always remember I remember my favourite game that I ever watched, but it was before I worked in media. Yeah. And that was the 4-3 Liverpool-Newcastle. Yeah. I remember watching that in my living room. And apart from the result, one of the most cracking games will have been Luton-Liverpool 5-3. But I was actually at a wedding that day. Would you believe?
That was well timed.
In Luton. Oh, God. Oh, you put me right on the spot, Daniel. I can't think.
I'm very sorry.
I can't think at all. See, if I'd have done Talksport for the Euros, I'd have hopefully have been saying to you, England winning the final.
Would be an easy answer next year, wouldn't it?
Oh, dear. I genuinely don't know. I know that's awful, isn't it? That's gonna ruin your podcast.
No, that's all right. I'll let you off for that one. You won't have ruined the podcast because when we started this, we probably made a list of about 10 people each who we'd love to interview. And you are the first person on my list that's come on the show. So you have more than made up for it, I can assure you.
Oh, that's good to know. Thanks for that. I'm so sorry it's taken me so long. It's just been one of those things. It's like, I genuinely don't know what my diary is doing from one day to the next.
Well, as we've discussed, your career in the last year has gone absolutely crazy, hasn't it? So we can forgive
Yeah.
you. And the fact that you can still give up a time for a little podcast like ours, we can't thank you enough for that. So
every podcast is important, and I'm looking forward to listening to it.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your time, and we really appreciate it, particularly me, I'll be honest.
Oh, thank you.